My name is Andrew Bain. My birth date is June 15th, 1960. I was born in Prairie Grove, Arkansas at the Elizabeth Hospital. Our doctor was Dr. Frank Regal. He delivered me.
And Doc, this interview is for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project, and we just want to be sure that we have your permission to reuse the interview.
You have my permission to reuse the interview.
Thanks, Doc. Who were your parents?
My parents were Dr. Calvin Bain and Joanne P. Bain from Prairie Grove. My mom was actually from Joplin. My dad grew up in Prairie Grove. And
tell me about your family, your siblings.
Okay. My family consists of 5 people, my parents, and then I have an older brother, John Calvin Bain, and then a sister, Catherine Joanne Coleman.
Okay, and tell me about your family's business.
My family's business, my dad was a dentist in Prairie Grove. He started practice here in 1950, and he practiced until about 1986, so for 36 years. And he was also the mayor of Prairie Grove for about 12 years. I think in the 60s and 70s is when he was mayor.
And tell me, what was your part in the family business? What would you do to help out?
Well, my part in the family business, as long as I can remember, I worked at his office. And he taught me how to do some of the lab work and chairside assisting. And so I grew up helping him at the office. And then we had some rentals that I took care of in Prairie Grove, and the mowing and maintenance of the rentals, painting when they had a changeover.
What other jobs did you work besides helping with your father's rental properties and running the office for him, helping with the dentist office?
Well, the only other job that I did, as a kid, I got into beekeeping when I was probably 14 years old, and wound up having about 10 hives, and paired up with James Kaiser, who was a beekeeper from Prairie Grove. And we would load up the bees and take them to pollination services at different orchards over into Oklahoma. The Offits had some peaches, and then we'd do the apples in Lincoln. And so, that was wound up being a pretty good business to be in.
Tell me more about working in your dad's dentist's office. At what age did you start, and what all different jobs would you do?
Well, the jobs that I would do at his office would be, pour up the models, make some of the plates for the dentures, then chairside assisting. If he ever had someone out of the office, I would assist him chairside. And my mom worked at the front desk a lot of times, and so I guess all 3 of us kids worked at the office quite a little bit.
Tell me about some of your routines at home. What was your home life like?
Well, my home life, we played a lot with the neighbors, and at that time I think you knew everyone in Prairie Grove. We had a lot of liberty as far as, we could take our bicycles just about anywhere. We had a pretty good sized lawn, so, we were expected to help with the lawn and the garden and things like that. We also had a farm out where Kenyon Lake is, and so I helped my dad with that farm. He actually had that with Greg Reed. Greg Reed and my dad owned that farm together. So,
tell me about your earliest memories of Prairie Grove. What the town was like when you first remember?
Well, I remember that we actually had a stoplight that worked at the corner of Mock and is it Buchanan? Is that Main Street? Yeah, we had one that actually switched colors there, and someone hit it with a truck, I think, and so they put in a stop and go there. I would go downtown, and Carmen Drug had a you could get a float there. You know, they actually had an ice cream parlor in there, and I remember going from the street up to that sidewalk. You know, I remember how much of a jump that was, and when I could actually jump up there, and now it doesn't look like much of a jump at all. So it's.
What are some of the other things you would do that you remember about Prairie Grove when you were a kid?
Well, we always had horses. We were members of the riding club, which was a big organization at that time, and we'd go on trail rides and things like that. Thinking about the Carmen Drug Store, Ruetta was one of the pharmacists there, and then Leck, her husband, and he had this white hair that just came out to the side, and I think he was a smoker, and he coughed a lot, and he was pretty intimidating, tall and skinny, but it's, yeah.
Tell me about going to Prairie Grove School. I know you started there. What was it like when you went to school in Prairie Grove?
I guess what I remember about elementary school was how good the food was in the cafeteria. Lee Couch's mom, Mabel Couch, was the head cook, and the rolls were incredible. The pizza was great. The cookies were good. You know, it was a lot different than what I hear about now. And you know, a lot of my parents' friends were teachers. You know, I had Peggy Parks as 4th grade. I think I had Miss Daughtery for 1st grade, and that was Bob Daughtery's mom. And I don't know, just, you know, smaller classes. You know, a lot of the people that I went to school with are still here in town. It seems.
What can you tell me about Peggy Parks? What was she like as a teacher?
With 20 years of schooling, I would put her in the top 5 teachers that I've ever had. She was a true professional, really expected a lot of her class, taught us things that I think most 4th graders didn't, you know, weren't exposed to. You know, different tricks on striking out 9s and, you know, in math, and just a very encouraging, very, very professional teacher.
What about the square dancing? Did she teach that to your class?
Yeah, well, I think we were already doing square dancing. You know, I know that she taught it to her early classes, and that's sort of how the square dancing started in Prairie Grove. But, you know, I square danced, I think, for 15 years. So, I don't remember her teaching it in the class, but I knew that she was responsible for that.
Who were some of your friends that you knew and grew up with in Prairie Grove, that some of your neighbors and some of your classmates that you can remember?
Oh, some of my neighbors and classmates, my next door neighbor was Doug Brown. His mom was a music teacher at Prairie Grove. And I guess when about junior high, he moved to Pine Bluff, and he had grown up, you know, next to us all those years, and he didn't like Pine Bluff, and so in the summers he'd come back and stay with us during the summer, and we're still really good friends with him, and he has every time he's in town, he checks in on my mom, and used to on my dad and my mom. But then Steve Bartholomew, Mark Kate, Elaine Clayton now. She was Elaine Can. Let's see, Jim Parks was just right up the street from me.
Uh,
There's
where did your family go to church, and what were some of your routines there?
Well, we were members of the First United Methodist Church of Prairie Grove. And my dad was actually a lifelong member there, and I think his mom also. So that's where we went to church.
What did you and your friends, when you were a kid growing up in Prairie Grove, what did you guys do for fun back in those days?
For diversion, we hunted a lot and fished a lot. Those were the two main activities. My dad was a big fisherman, and so he always had a boat, and I would go with him. And if I couldn't go with him, I'd usually get the boat ready on Wednesday afternoon, for him to leave Wednesday afternoon to go fishing. But we always, just would walk out of our house and go rabbit hunting or squirrel hunting down in the Harlan farm.
What would adults, your parents and their friends, do for fun when you were a kid? What do you remember them doing?
Well, my parents, for fun, lifelong, they played bridge. I also remember them entertaining a lot, and they'd have couples from Fayetteville and Prairie Grove out to the house, and it would not be uncommon for them to roll back the carpet and turn on some music and dance. And my family was fairly formal, and so we'd have sit-down dinner every evening. Cloth napkins, real silverware, no stand-up and eating, and so we had a lot of good conversations around the dinner table.
Would you do that when you entertained with guests too?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I just remember, Dr. Miller and C.H. Miller and different university professors, Bob and Maria Teresa Franz, and several people from the university would come out, and it seems like almost weekly they would entertain or be entertained. They were very social.
Tell me about how you went from working for your dad as a dentist and then later got into business with your brother and then worked on your own. Kind of tell me about the evolution of your work in the dentist field, dentistry.
Okay. Well, after high school, I went to the University of Arkansas, and I majored in chemistry. And I was not real sure what I was going to do. Dentistry was always in the back of my mind. I sort of entertained engineering, didn't really know. And then as I got a few years older, I sort of got to thinking about the amount of time with family is a lot better with dentistry than it is with some of the other professions. And I'd always enjoyed working in my dad's office, and so I applied for dental school. I just applied to one school, the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and that's where both my dad and my brother had gone, and was accepted and started dental school in 1982 and graduated in 86, and came back to Prairie Grove and joined the practice of my dad and my brother. By that time, my dad was cutting way back. I think he worked 3 days a week at that time. And so John and I were in practice until 1994, until I built my office that I'm currently in.
Okay. Tell me about your grandfather. I know he had a business here and was well known here in town. Tell me what you remember about him.
Well, as far as memories of my grandfather, he died before I was born. I think John was 2 when he passed away. they had two kids, Dick Bain and Effie Bain. And my uncle was 12 years older than my dad. And so my Uncle Tom, that's who I'm named after. And in fact, my uncle was my dad's math teacher at Prairie Grove High School. He taught math, and then he later became a president of First State Bank in Springdale. And then my grandparents, just what I've heard and what my parents have told me about them, and what many people in Prairie Grove is, my granddad was quite a character. He ran the Southland Oil Company. He did some auctioneering, and he removed warts. He was a wart doctor. And just a funny story about that, when I was taking my dental boards down in Memphis, I had a couple of patients with me, and one of my classmates asked me, well, I know your dad was a dentist, what about your granddad? And I said, no, he was a wart doctor. And he sort of laughed like, that wasn't a thing. And, he just sort of made fun of that idea. And I didn't know it at the time, but both of these patients had had warts removed by my granddad, and they took great offense and explained that it was a real deal, that he would charm the warts off, give them a penny and tell them not to spend it for a week or something like that. I don't know. He'd rub something on it, and they both had warts removed by him. So it was, and I could name several people in town. Joyce Cunningham would tell you the same thing. So.
How does that work? Is there a medical basis to that?
Well, I've asked a friend of mine who's a physician in town, and he says that it's about as effective as what physicians do. It's something with the power of suggestion, I guess. I don't know, but medical treatment is not very predictable either. But I don't know, this Dr. Bright said that, it's as effective as what some of the current treatments is. It's really crazy.
Tell me about his shop. I know you're hearing this from others, but what do you know about his shop that he ran in town here, his gas station?
Well, my granddad's shop was about where the Jim's Razorback Pizza is. And his house was right next door. And my dad grew up working in that shop, changing tires and filling up gas. And the story that my dad always told is to save some money, sometimes they would mix kerosene and gasoline together, because kerosene was a little cheaper than the gasoline. And, they would pump it up into the glass globes, and then, it was gravity drain into the vehicles. And, I think oil was like 15 cents a quart, and gas was probably 19 cents, And there was a checker table down there, and they played checkers all the time. From what I've heard, my dad was pretty good. I know I've never won against him, and he played with Charlie Wilson, a lot of the old men. He grew up playing checkers with the old men, and evidently became really good at it.
Tell me more about your dad. Kind of what was his work history, because he did a lot more than just being a dentist.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me.
Well, he grew up, his parents were not well off at all. My grandmother worked in the Crescent as a seamstress, and also was a switchboard operator for the phone company at one time. And I think, like a lot of the kids from Prairie Grove, when they were old enough, a lot of people have worked for the phone company, and my dad did also. And he said it was a real mistake that they found out that he wasn't allergic to poison ivy because he got the job of clearing the right of way, you know, and but he worked alongside Donald and Barry and Joe. Joe was working for the phone company at that time, and did that until he went to college, I think.
Tell me about your tenure with the city. I know you were on an alderman and then later mayor. Tell me about that, about your service in the city.
I think as my tenure with the city started about 1992, I think, when I ran for city council. I'm not sure about the exact date, but as I remember, I was a councilman for about four years, and Murph was on the council at that time, and Carol was the secretary, I believe, and I guess your dad was the city attorney, wasn't he at that time? Yeah. And Eileen Manning was the mayor, and I was on the council for 4 years, and then decided to run for mayor after that. And as I remember, there was a three-way race. It was between Eileen and Jim Bell and myself, and wound up winning a majority, and took office in 1996, and remained in office until I built a house outside of town, and once I moved into the house, then that disqualified me from being mayor.
Tell me about some of the things that happened, some of the projects and different things that you remember happening when you under your leadership with the city when you were the mayor.
Well, I guess one of the bigger projects that we had was the sewer line that was put across the Battlefield Park. That really allowed for the development to the east of town, and it was a real state parks generally do not grant easements, but a lot of things came together with that, as far as them needing sewer for the park itself, and that would have allowed for that, and but that was a major accomplishment. I think also the renovation of the library was something that we were one of the very few votes on millages for libraries that actually passed in the state at that time. And the citizens of Prairie Grove have always been very supportive of the public library, and I think we have a really nice library. As far as some of the other things, the 2-ton water system was one of those things where we opted to process some of the water ourselves, and then buy some from 2-ton to sort of allow for the future as far as water. And then one of the other things that comes to mind is we started the water park and the baseball and softball fields. They were actually completed right after I moved out of the city, so I think Homer Dalrymple was the mayor at the time that they were actually completed, but the millage was passed when I was mayor.
How big a deal was that Reef Park project?
Well, I think people did not anticipate it going through. A swimming pool had been talked about in Prairie Grove since the time the Heineman Hall was built, because the Heinemans, the family there, wanted to build something in Prairie Grove to commemorate General Heineman. And I know Delford Reef was opposed to the swimming pool at that time because of the liability of the town, and anyway, they opted for the Heineman Hall, the museum up there, as opposed to a swimming pool. And it had been talked about from, I guess, that time on, because we didn't have a swimming pool in Prairie Grove. And someone approached me and suggested that we needed that, and I said I didn't think there was a downside to putting it before the voters and letting the voters decide, and it has proven to be a pretty nice asset to Prairie Grove.
How were the baseball fields and the skate park included with that? How'd that work out?
The skate park, as I remember, was not initially included in that. I think Murph Pear was instrumental in getting the skate park done. The baseball fields and the softball fields were from the inception in the design, and because some of the adjoining cities had facilities like that, and summer softball and baseball are it's an income source, and plus it's an activity for the kids of the town that parents will do a lot for their kids, and that they proved it by voting that millage in.
Let's talk about the Battlefield Park. What are your earliest memories of the park, and then how did it kind of evolve over time?
Well, since I can remember, the celebration, the Labor Day celebration, I remember that most vividly, helping with that. We would, at that time, they had open pits to cook chicken. John Mobley comes to mind there. He was a big man, and they had wire grates that they would put the chicken in, and they could turn the frames, the wire frames, over an open fire, and that's how they cooked the chicken. And then we'd have to get up really early and go down to the elementary school to Miss Mobley's. Not Miss Mobley, Miss Couch's kitchen, and we would do baked beans with bacon on the top and bake them in the ovens down there in the elementary school kitchen. And then the project was to get them hauled up to the Battlefield Park for the dinners that were served, the chicken dinners that were served, and it was really messy, and we had a station wagon that suffered from that a few times, and but that was probably when I was 5 or 6 years old. I'd go with my dad, get up with him, and go help make the beans down in the kitchen. But the whole community came together for that. The Parkses worked. It was just the Lions Club was the main impetus behind that.
What about the expansion of the park? How much of that happened under your tenure as mayor? What do you remember about that?
Well, there was that was about the time, that they expanded the park. There was a lot of talk about preserving that, because Prairie Grove Battlefield Park is one of the parks in the United States that is as close to how it was during the actual battle as just about anywhere else. Pea Ridge is also one of those like that, and some of the older battlefields, have malls on them, and they've been developed, and this one had not been developed, and so there was a desire to try to preserve some of that land. So for our kids and their kids, and just the concept of that park was started by Dr. Fredman, who had this vision of a pioneer village, and he put a lot of his money and his effort into building a lot of the rock fences, moving a lot of the structures that are currently at the park. And I've often thought, by doing that, there's no telling how many thousands and thousands of lives he's touched by his foresight into sort of setting that aside, and it is something that was later taken over by the state park department. And there's an educational component. There's a lot of the school kids come up there, and I mean it's thousands of kids a year that have benefited from sort of something that started pretty small as a thought of a pioneer village. And land is precious, and setting that aside and expanding that, I think, is really going to be something that may pay off a lot in not only now but in the future.
Tell me about Fred.
Okay, well, Fred McQuistion and Madge were sort of like grandparents to me. They had no kids of their own. Fred was the son of a circuit riding Methodist preacher. He had like 5 brothers and a couple of sisters, and grew up in Prairie Grove. And he was an identical twin. He had a twin brother, Ed, and married Madge McQuistion in like 1920 or something like that. And they first lived in New York. Fred got a job. He was first with the Arkansas Department of Education, and then took a job with the Rockefeller Foundation. And his life's work was in promoting Negro higher education. And the Rockefeller Foundation funded a lot of the colleges around the country that were, for the Negro. And Ed, his twin brother, worked for the Arkansas State Department of Education. And from what I've heard is that after the riots at Central High School, that he was the one that took over that situation, because he had a lot of trust on both sides. And he is also credited with being very instrumental in the formation of the University of Pine Bluff. And which started out as a Negro college, I believe, also. So two boys from Prairie Grove, basically spent their lives promoting Negro education, which is something pretty unique. When Fred left the Rockefeller Foundation, he moved back to Prairie Grove, and they bought the house up on Bush Street. And then his main focus was on the Pioneer Village, as he called it, which wound up being the Prairie Grove Battlefield Park.
Tell me about some other people in Prairie Grove that have been influential. I know you are very familiar with Frances Baguette.
Frances Baguette.
What can you tell me about her?
Frances Baguette was married to Dr. Jeff Baguette. Dr. Jeff Baguette was a hunting buddy of my dad's, and they bird hunted a lot together. And Frances, there's no doubt where she stands. Even today, there's no doubt where she stands. She's still alive and living down in Little Rock, and just a very put together person. Always drove a Cadillac. You know, just she also played bridge with my mom, and so I grew up knowing her very well. And then probably the most influential people in Prairie Grove were the Parkses, and we're related distantly, but I grew up playing tennis, and Donald Parks, I mean, from the time I was 13 or 14 years old, would come by and get me to play tennis with him. And I would play with General French, who was Mary Bartholomew's dad. And I mean, there were several older men that would that I grew up playing tennis with. Leroy Jones, Donald and Barry Parks, Lee Jones, and Catherine DeLapp played, and but Donald I spent more time with, and it's, you know, now that I'm probably about the age he was when he was playing with me, I understand why he liked playing with me, because if you can beat someone half your age or a third of your age, you know, life doesn't get much better than that. So, you know, but he was one of the most civic-minded human beings I've ever been around.
Tell about some of the ways he would do things to help, but kind of keep his name out of the spotlight.
Well, how Donald would help, in my capacity as mayor, if we had a project going on, he would always be willing to donate, as long as I would not make it public. The Walton Foundation was also, you know, working with Greg Reed at the bank was another one that they do a lot for small towns. But Donald would, you know, he just cared about what the town looked like. He would pick up trash, he would mow. There's no telling how many blades of grass that man has mowed in his life. And I think from what I hear, he started off mowing the Battlefield Park to keep it groomed, and then that just expanded to where he did, I mean, cleaning out ditches. They just do so much for the city. And, you know, I remember him telling me, you know, because he really wanted everything neat. And he said he wasn't very interested in real estate, but he just wanted to own what was next to him, you know, because that way he had control over it. And I remember when I was getting ready to build my office, I had a lot there, and my mower broke down, and I let it get a little high, and you know, my mower was almost fixed, but it wasn't fixed. And he came up to the office and he said, "Okay, I'm going to have my people mow it, and I'll send you the bill." And I said, "That's fine," you know. But he just could not stand to have anything high, you know, or let go like that. So, but.
What other stories can you think of maybe that I haven't thought to ask about?
Let me think here just a second. While I was mayor, I found out this story about Lucy Byrd Mock. I don't know if you've covered that with anyone else, but the Arkansas Golf Hall of Fame approached me, and they were wanting to induct Lucy Byrd Mock into the Hall of Fame posthumously. And I found out what evidently, she went to Scotland back in the late 1800s and fell in love with golf, and then returned to Prairie Grove and wanted to put in a golf course. And she grew up in the house across from the high school, that two-story house across from what's now the new high school. And her dad did not want to let any of his good plantation land go to a golf course, and so wouldn't let her build the golf course on her place. But her uncle, Dr. Will H. Mock, who was a physician here in Prairie Grove, had some land out south of town, and they, from what I heard, put in a 5-hole golf course out there on his land, which is, I guess, where Pinnacle Hill. I guess the Bartholomew's own that now, or it's out south of town. And she gave golf lessons, and I thought that was so interesting, and I told my dad about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I knew her. She gave me golf lessons when I was a kid in Peggy Park, which is down where the library is." But that was just the first golf course in the state of Arkansas was in Prairie Grove, Arkansas, and she was a very interesting person. She was a poet also, and she, I think, moved down to Fort Smith and then wound up in Eureka Springs. But she wrote a poem that was read at the opening ceremony for the 1936 Olympics in Germany, and it's still on display in the Olympic headquarters. And that was just a pretty interesting thing, I thought.
If someone came to you and said, "Dr. Bain, tell me what makes your hometown of Prairie Grove special," what would you tell them?
The giving mentality of the people. I have never heard of a community that supports its people like Prairie Grove does. And I could give some examples. My brother-in-law had, when he was 14 or 15, had leukemia. And, his dad was an athletic director at Prairie Grove Schools, and the community came together and supported them and raised money just amazingly. And there's been several other instances when that's happened, when a waitress needs a surgery that doesn't have health insurance. Pie supper raised $20,000 or something, 18, I don't know what it was, but to support people. In my office, Randall Reeve, Cindy's husband, who's been our fire chief and been a member of the fire department for probably 40 years, I don't know how long. But when he had an extremely serious illness, people from this church, got together and raised money for him. And I just think that's something that, it may exist other places, but I sure don't know how it could be any more than it is in Prairie Grove.